Hey there, friends. Welcome back. Y'all know what to do by now. Grab a glass of sweet tea, sit on down, and let's talk about this case. I'm your host, Josie, and today we're diving into another intriguing story. So get comfortable and let's get going. I'm just going to go ahead and tell y'all what my goofy self has done. I recorded this entire podcast without my microphone being on. So here we are doing it again. But that's okay. I'm going to do it for you. Okay, y'all, I'm going to start off by telling y'all I am loving this weather. 80 degrees means it's getting cooler down here in South Mississippi. Hallelujah, praise the Lord. It was a beautiful weekend and I enjoyed getting outside because, honey, I don't go outside much when it's 100 degrees. I prefer the AC. I did go to a fall festival this weekend and it was so much fun. But something got my sinuses a stirring up and I've got enough snot to fill a damn kiddie pool. Awful. Speaking of cooler weather, it dawned on me today that there's only 11 weeks until Christmas. Christmas is my absolute favorite holiday. I feel like people are just happier, more jolly, and something about it just gives me a sense of peace. However, I will say it does get me stressed trying to buy gifts and get everything wrapped. Even coming up with gift ideas is hard for me. I am legitimately the worst gift giver on the planet. But anywho, let me quit my rambling. Today's case is going to be set in Georgia. So let me give you some facts about Georgia to get this going. Georgia is known as the peach state. Have y'all had a Georgia peach? They are delicious. But despite the nickname, Georgia produces more peanuts, blueberries, and pecans than peaches. Georgia is home to the world's busiest airports, the Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, which is located in Atlanta. Georgia was a major center for the civil rights movement. And Georgia has the largest swamp in North America. Let me see if I can not butcher this name. Okefenokee Swamp. I am hoping I said that right because it sounds fun. It's just a fun word to say. Okefenokee. Atlanta, Georgia is home to the Varsity, which is a restaurant that serves more Coca-Cola than any other single restaurant in the world. I found that super interesting. Now, I thought it was fun to do some weird laws in the state of the last case that we did last week, so I'm going to hit y'all with some this week too. In Georgia, the funniest laws were number 1, no fried chicken with forks in Gainesville. Number 2, giraffes can't be tied to street lamps in Atlanta. And number 3, no whistling after 11 p.m. on Mondays in Atlanta. Those just gave me a little chuckle, so I figured y'all like them. But anyway, let's get rocking and rolling. Today's case is the Woolfolk Murders. This was Georgia's first mass murder. 9 members of the Woolfolk family were killed with an axe in their home near Macon. This murder was known as the bloodiest mass murder in Georgia history. Crazy. The murder took place August 6, 1887 in Bibb County, Georgia. The family was axed to death while they were sleeping. The dad of the family was named Richard. I'm going to give y'all some information on the family. Richard was born in 1835. When Richard was 19, he married Susan, who was 13 years old. Now, that is frowned upon in today's age, but it was common back then to marry young teen girls. Richard inherited a farmhouse on 80 acres. When Susan was 14, she had their first baby named Fluoride. Is that not the best name? Fluoride, that's so funny. But they called her Flo. Then they had another daughter named Lily, and then they had the firstborn son, Tom. Tom was born in 1860. Just a little tidbit, the Civil War was in 1861. So Richard had become a captain in the Confederate Army. Well, when Susan was 24, she suddenly passed away. So Richard decided to send the kids to live with Susan's sister in Athens. Now, Susan's sister was like a mama to them kids. They loved her, she loved them, and they enjoyed the fact that she would tell them stories about their mama. In 1867, when Richard was 32, he remarried. He married 21-year-old Maddie Howard. Maddie was her father's only daughter, and he had sent her to college for an education, which was rare for that time period. Not long after they got married, they sent for the kids to come live with them at the plantation. So once the kids got back, Tom was adjusting well in the beginning since he was still pretty young. The sisters had a little bit more of a difficult time adjusting just because they were a bit older, so that makes sense, you know. But Maddie treated all three of the kids well, treated them as her own, which is great. Shortly after they were settled, Richard and Maddie started having more children. They ended up having 6 children together. Richard Jr., Susan Pearl, known as Pearl, Annie, Rosebud, Charles Howard, known as Charlie, and baby Maddie, named after her mama. Good gravy, that's a lot of kids. So they had those 6 plus the 3 that Richard had already had. Well, once the additional kids started coming, Tom's relationship started getting worse with Maddie. He was worried that his dad's new family, as he put it, would take his rightful place as the firstborn and that they would get his father's money. And Tom had no problem letting it be known how he felt about that. Tom did seem to be kind of jealous of the younger kids because they got to have their mama and he didn't since his mama had passed away. Well, as years passed, Richard tried hard to help Tom become a businessman. Tom had tried several different businesses with Richard footing the bill for all of it, but none of the businesses made it. And then Tom decided he was going to go to Texas and become a real cowboy. Obviously that crap didn't work, so he came running back home to Georgia. And he could not keep a job to save his life. That dude drank and fought constantly. And Richard had finally had enough of Tom's nonsense and told Tom he wasn't getting any more large chunks of money. And of course, Tom didn't want to take any blame or recognize he had problems, so he just decided he was going to blame it on Maddie and the younger kids as to why he was being cut off from his daddy's money. So Tom became fixated on showing Richard that he should inherit everything. So he came up with this little scheme as to how he could get his dad's money. He decided to go out and get a wife for himself, thinking that the captain would be generous with him if he was married. So Tom took him a little trip over to Jones County and met 17-year-old Georgia. Tom bragged about how wealthy his dad was and told Georgia that he would be inheriting Richard's money. When Tom proposed to Georgia, he told her that if she married him, they would have their own house on the plantation. This fella made it sound real good, like she would be set for life. Georgia's parents were not a fan of Tom's, but Georgia thought it all sounded great and that she would be getting a better life. And I don't blame the girl, honestly. So Tom and Georgia hopped on a train to Macon, and while they were traveling back, they decided to go on ahead and get hitched on the train. Well, when they made it back to Macon, Tom took Georgia to his sister Floride's house, since he clearly didn't have a place to stay. And while they were there, Tom started to be an ass. He was straight up being mean to Georgia, and quite frankly was pretty jerkish to Floride too, honestly. And Georgia started getting scared of Tom. Georgia says that Tom told her, "Father has not fixed me up, and I'm going to burn the family." Dude had problems. With him also saying, "Father is rich and has plenty. If I can't get it, then none of the others shall have it." And Georgia was like, "Nope, I am out of here." And she stayed 3 weeks and then hit the road. Smart gal. Well, so Tom did stay close to his aunt and would go visit her often. And she started to notice that he had become paranoid and was real mean. He would pace the floors and would chit-chat with himself. So she was like, he's lost it. His aunt reportedly said that if she and Tom's sisters were having a conversation that Tom couldn't hear, then he would accuse them of talking about him. This dude even carried a gun around thinking somebody was going to kill him. Sounds like the dude was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs is what it sounds like to me. I did see a notation that said he had told Maddie and Richard that Fluoride was scheming against him. All of that aside, Fluoride still loved him and felt they couldn't turn him away. He was family after all. Not only did the aunt try to tell Richard that something was going on with Tom and that he was crazy, but so did the sisters. But Richard blew them all off and said Tom was fine. Well, Tom eventually went back to work on the plantation, but this time he didn't get special treatment and he was a hired hand just like the rest of the workers. Later on, his aunt told interviewers that Maddie had told her own dad that Tom had threatened to send her straight to hell. How scary is that? Well, the morning of the murders rolls around, and between 2 and 4 a.m., Tom ran to the closest neighbor, Green Lockett, telling him to come quick that his father was being killed. Green Lockett was a black sharecropper who worked for Richard, and this was a time where racial tensions were high, to say the least. And Lockett didn't want anything he could be blamed for, so he didn't want to go to the house with Tom by himself. And the man clearly had some good gut instincts on that one. So Lockett sends his son to the nearest white neighbor's house for help. Well, about that time, another man named Anderson came up and said he would go with Lockett and Tom to the house. So they all started heading that way. It was pitch black and there wasn't any noise, which was creepy as all get out. So at that point, Anderson said he wasn't going in that house either. So since nobody would go in, Tom went in the house alone to check on his family. He was in the house about 10 minutes before he came back out and told Anderson and Lockett that all 9 people in the house were dead. All 9. That number included Temperance West, Maddie's 84-year-old aunt who was visiting. It wasn't too long before the white neighbors, the sheriff, and the coroner showed up. Tom told them all that the family was dead. But they all agreed not to go in the house until the sun came up because nobody had any candles or anything to give off light. So they asked Tom what happened. So he gets to tell them the story. He told them that in the middle of the night, he had heard Richard yelling and was going to go see what was happening. He was trying to get woke up and get his bearings so he could go in there and see what was going on. And he saw his brother Dick run through the house and go to the parents' room. And then he heard Dick get hit and the sound of a fall. So Tom said he decided to jump out the window and run for help. So instead of going to check on anybody, he just hightails it, you know. Tom was very blunt and matter-of-fact about it, not showing any emotion. When they were finally able to go into the house, the scene was gruesome. Some people even started throwing up because it was so awful. There was blood everywhere, and the smell of blood was just smacking them around. The family had been axed to death. And Dick, who was 20 years old, and 5-year-old Charlie were found on the floor in the bedroom. 16-year-old Pearl was laying across the foot of her mama and dad's bed. Richard and Maddie were in the bed, and their sweet baby girl was laying dead in between them. There was blood and brain matter all over the entire room. In another room, they found Temperance, Maddie's aunt, and 7-year-old Rosebud murdered and in pools of blood. And then there was Annie. Poor 10-year-old Annie was found under a window with one arm up on the windowsill like she had been trying to get out. Absolute devastation is what they found in that house. So heartbreaking. The axe was left at the scene of the crime. So suspicion immediately was on Tom. I mean, come on. It had to be the obvious answer, right? There were bloody footprints all over the house, and Tom admitted that they were his. He said they were from when he was running around the house trying to check on everybody. Pretty much everyone was like, yeah, it had to be Tom. Especially since he stood to inherit everything. I do want to note that Tom had specks of blood in his ear and a bloody handprint on his thigh. Well, so when he was questioned about that, Tom explained it, saying that he had bent over and put his hand on his thigh when he threw up from seeing his family brutally attacked. I mean, that's a little bit of a plausible story there. Tom told authorities that he had moved Pearl's body and put her on the bed when he was trying to check on her. Which is weird in itself. Like, why would you move the body? You know? Now, there was a large spot in the room that he shared with his brothers that had been scrubbed with soap and water. Tom told the investigators that that was there because the night before he had taken a basin of water and shaved. And the math just ain't mathing on that one. Why would it still be wet? I find that interesting. Nobody believed that bull malarkey. But there were no signs of forced entry and nothing was stolen. So get this. When Tom was offered some water from the well, he refused to drink it. He was like, no, I'm not touching that. And everybody was wondering, like, why? Why won't he drink the water? Well, they later found out that he had thrown his bloody clothes into the well. When they asked Tom about it, he said, I don't remember. I mean, how in the dickens do you take all your clothes off and throw them in a well and then not remember? I would like to call absolute bullshittery on that. Everybody was pissed because they had been drinking that water and it was contaminated with the family's blood. Lord of mercy. So everybody had kept talking about how something seemed off with Tom and saying how it was weird that he wasn't showing any emotion, which, yeah, that is odd, but I do also understand that sometimes people go into shock. I don't get the vibe that that was the situation here, but it does happen. Well, before the coroner's jury decided if Tom should be charged with murder, the sheriff just went on ahead and arrested him. There were already about 1,000 people on the property by that point, and the people were ready to lynch him. Now keep in mind, the full-blooded older sisters were not in the house when this happened. They were already grown and gone by then. The sisters just could not believe that he would do this, and they thought he was innocent. Well, December 5th, 1887 rolls around and the trial gets started. Tom acted completely uninterested in what was going on in that trial, but he did maintain that he was innocent. And Tom acted shocked that people thought he killed his own family. So, I don't know why you acting shocked. I think at this point, we're all feeling the same way. The evidence was circumstantial, but it only took the jury less than 15 minutes to find Tom guilty. He was sentenced to hang. However, Tom was granted a second trial because the judge didn't handle the case properly. The judge didn't stop when the spectators in the court started chanting, hang him. And the judge would not let Tom's attorney bring in any witnesses. So he got the second trial. However, the second trial was moved to a new county so he could kind of get like a impartial situation, okay? Unbiased. In this new trial, witnesses did come forth. A maid for the family said that the bloody socks in the well were not Tom's and that they were actually her son's socks, and that the shirt that was found was not Tom's either. It was believed to be his brother's shirt. But that did not change the outcome though. Tom was still found guilty and sentenced to hang. But that entire time, Tom still kept saying he was innocent. They did do an appeal for the second guilty verdict, but it was upheld anyway. Now, pause on that for a second. So there was a black man named Jackson Dubose who was in prison, and he had claimed that he had been at the Woolfolk house while the murders took place. He even went as far as bragging, saying that he was part of it, but said he didn't do the killing. But then he changed his little story up and said that he was out in the yard stealing apples, and Green Locket's wife and another man went around to the back of the house and Tom let them in, and he says that all three of them killed the family. And then he said he saw Tom jump out of the window and run over to Lockett's shack. Nobody knew if it was true or not, because it was easy to get the details of the case out of newspaper clippings and such, so he could have just read the details and manufactured this whole story. But the authorities were like, well, let's question him. Let's go talk to him. When authorities started questioning him about it, he said, and they were like, well, how were the murders committed? He said, by a bomb. So his information simply did not add up. But he was charged with accessory to murder. But then authorities decided he was insane and sent him to an asylum. Rightfully so, because it sounds like that's where he belonged. So on October 28th, Tom got to visit with his sisters, and they stayed up until 2 a.m. talking and visiting. And then he requested that they let him sleep in the next morning. And they did. He woke up around 8 the next morning and gave an interview saying, I expect I will die today, and I hope I will meet it like a man. He told reporters that he didn't have any statements except that he was innocent. And then the minister came in and prayed over him, and he told the minister, "I'm an innocent man, and God ain't going to punish a man for what he never did." So that's interesting to me. October 29th, 1890, I was about to say 1990, but it was 1890, and Tom was let out to be hanged. This was a massive event. There were over 10,000 people who had gathered to watch the execution. It was so insane that there were even people there selling souvenirs at a freaking execution. Everybody kind of expected Tom to confess. Typically, people who are about to die would confess to their wrongdoings, but not Tom. Instead, a statement was read, and this is what was said. "I, Thomas G. Woolfolk, realizing the existence of an infinite, wise, and holy God, and so as to meet him, knowing all that I have ever done, and fully understanding that I must stand before the judgment bar of God, and that today, in a few hours, I shall be called into his presence, do solemnly declare my innocence, and I leave as my last declaration that I did not take the life of my father or any member of his family, or have any knowledge of the person or persons who did the murderous deed." Signed, Thomas G. Woolfolk. So that was a interesting declaration there as well. Well, at 1:31 p.m., they opened the trapdoor underneath Tom, but the fall did not break his neck, and Tom slowly strangled to death. He didn't die until 2:11. And that was actually the last public execution done in Georgia. It's suspected that that was because it was just so awful watching him die slowly like that. Tom's sisters had a plot already, and so they buried him at the plot that they had. So let me pause there, and let me back up and give you some insights real quick. Turns out that Richard was actually not as well off as everybody thought. He had a business that had gone under, and his house and land was tied up in it. And he was going to lose that property. And that happened to be around the time that he married Maddie. So it was suspected to be a part of the business deal to marry her. Maddie's father bought the home and some of the land and gave it to Maddie. So the property actually belonged to Maddie and not Richard. Also, it was said that Richard mistreated his black employees. He did them so dirty. He was awful to them. So the majority of them disliked him and held a lot of resentment toward him, and rightfully so. But that's important to note because of what I'm about to tell you. And there was a black farm worker named Simon Cooper who worked for the Woolfolk family. Simon was London Cooper's son. London actually testified against Tom. Now, later on, there was a family in South Carolina who was axed to death, and Simon was actually lynched in Somerville, South Carolina, for that murder. And they found a notebook of Simon's that said, "Tom Woolfolk was mighty slick, but I fixed him. I would have killed him with the rest of the damn family, but he was not at home." That really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Heck, now I'm wondering myself if he really did it. Who do y'all think did it? Was it Tom? Was it Simon? Was it someone else? Tell me what you think. I would love to hear your ideas, friends. Well, that's a wrap for today, folks. I'm glad I was actually able to record it this time. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Sweet Tea and Crime. I hope you enjoyed our dive in today's case. Do you have a case that you'd like for us to talk about? Feel free to email it to sweetteaandcrime1, that's the number 1, @gmail.com, or throw it in my comments. Don't forget to grab another glass of sweet tea and join me next time for more crime. Until then, stay curious and keep exploring. I'm your host, Josie. Be good and stay safe.